Mike, you left off with, explaining the importance of thinking and being independent and developing yourself in that way, intellectually, and how that can reflect on, your success in bodybuilding and all things in life, I think. One of the questions that I like to bat around when I get a chance is, why do you think it is, and I don't know if you have any thought on this or whatever, but why do you think it is that people want to build their bodies to begin with? Especially, and I can say those guys, but you were one of those guys, Mike. You were freaking huge.
Yeah.
And strong.
Well, why shouldn't they want to build their bodies? When Sir Edmund Hillary was asked why he climbed Mount Everest, he said because it was there.
Yeah.
Well, what's most immediate to people? Their bodies. There's nothing wrong in taking care of your body or even wanting to build it, as long as it doesn't become a preoccupation and take your focus away from the development of the mind. It was the ancient Greeks. It was in the age of classical Greece, 23 centuries ago, that the dictum, a healthy mind and a healthy bodybuilding, arose.
And so
there's nothing wrong with building the body as long as you don't miss the most crucial factor or element, the mind. If a given individual listening is interested in studying philosophy, be very, very careful. Ideas are crucially important. Ayn Rand pointed out that philosophy is the wholesaler of man's affair. Everything we're doing even now, Bill, is philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is explicit. It's clearly verbalized. Involved in what we're doing are a lot of implicit ideas. One of the most interesting one, which comes from romantic philosophy. We do love knowledge. Those listening to the tape do love knowledge. That implies that they value their life. If you value knowledge, then you value your means of survival, which is your mind. If you value your means of survival, then you value your life. This is how interesting philosophy can get. If you're interested, listener, in studying philosophy at all, be careful. Ideas are crucially important. The wrong idea can lead you down the wrong path, as happened in, of course, pre-World War II Germany. There was a reason why the Nazis took over. It was pointed out in a book recently by Dr. Leonard Peikoff, Ayn Rand's Intellectual Error, that before every dictator's takeover, that dictator undertakes a campaign to literally destroy the people's confidence in reason, in knowledge. Hitler literally hired a bunch of writers, a bunch of quacks, to disseminate information whose ultimate purpose was to undermine people's confidence in their own ability to think and perceive reality. A dictator cannot take over in a country, Bill, where people are independent, i.e. know how to think for themselves. What is independence? In order to become an independent individual, you have to learn how to think so you can deal with reality successfully.
Mm-hmm.
People who are dependent are people who don't know how to think.
Yeah, that's true. So
be careful, people. That was my point. I would suggest, rather than just jumping into philosophy blindly by caprice, you be very careful and start out with Ayn Rand. Just as there is and can be, Bill, only one valid theory of bodybuilding or one valid theory of medicine, astronomy, physics, it's also true there can only be one valid theory of life. Man's life, man himself has a specific nature. You can only formulate a valid working theory of life if you understand man's nature, and that was Ayn Rand's passion. Her passion was man's consciousness. She understood that man is in fact the divine spark in the great chain of being. Man is the highest of all living species. We are the intelligent, creative force in the world. Man said, let there be light, and now all we got to do is switch on a light.
So, libraries?
Her books can be found in libraries, but she's becoming quite popular, and her books can be found in most bookstores. She was, in addition to being a philosopher, Bill, a novelist, and her philosophy is contained in her novels. The two most famous being The Fountainhead, which was made into a movie at one time, and also Atlas Shrugged. Atlas Shrugged can appear a bit formidable to a beginner in this area. It's about 1,200 pages. So if you're interested, listener, in getting involved in philosophy and reading Ayn Rand, I suggest you start with one of her novels, The Fountainhead. In addition, what you might consider doing actually concurrently to reading that is reading one of her books of essays on philosophy. Probably the best place to start would be Philosophy Who Needs It. A good question. Many people regard philosophy rather gingerly, as nothing more than a bauble of the intellect, as Leonard Peacock pointed out. In fact, it's the most crucial factor or power in human life. Think about it seriously. What is it that's guiding us today? What has allowed Bill Phillips to become more successful than so many other people? He's got a philosophy. He's identified the value of productive work, using his mind, searching for truth, learning how to distinguish truth from falsehood. That's his philosophy, whether he has stated it explicitly or just leaves it to being implicit. But I'm sure he has done that at different times, and all of you have listening to this tape. At some point in their lives, most people have identified the values of logic, reason, knowledge, progress, freedom. These are all ideas. The problem is, very often people identify those things, and then they're so caught up in the dramatic rush of events in their daily life, they fail to identify one crucial idea that would really help them in this area, and that is the importance of defining their philosophy. They go, yeah, okay, I like that idea. I understand knowledge is very important, but then they forget it. And they fail to take the time to study knowledge and find out what it's really all about.
This is fascinating stuff.
Philosophy is about ideas. What we're doing today, everything that we do on this tape, everything you did in your last tape with Brad Jeffries was an exchange of ideas. Ideas are the wholesaler of man's affairs. The efficacy of an individual's actions depend on whether or not his ideas are true or false, right or wrong, consistent or inconsistent, rational or irrational. How can you discover whether or not the ideas guiding you in your life are true or false, right or wrong? By studying philosophy. This is the purpose of philosophy. To define knowledge, provide man with a means of cognition or thinking, provide him with a means of distinguishing truth from falsehood, provide him with a means or a method of establishing the criteria of what he may rightfully accept as knowledge. This is the most crucial fact in human life. Do you think they would have gotten to the moon successfully if they hadn't taken ideas seriously? Science is not just something for people in white lab coats running around the NASA building or in medical labs. Science is a way of thinking. It's a way of understanding and feeling the world. You don't have to be a genius or a professional intellectual to do it. Philosophy is actually fun. The problem is that in most of our public schools, we are taught to associate learning with drudgery, boredom.
Right.
That's the problem. You have to reprogram your computer, people. You have to identify explicitly the value of knowledge in your life and make it fun. What could be more ingenious? What could be more exciting than waking up every day enthusiastic to go out there and look for more knowledge? Like the Buddha did. Remember the Buddha? Bill Phillips, I'll bet, knowing you as well as I do, I'll bet there was a time when you read about the Buddha and you got excited.
Yeah, no, I think...
You even identified with him. Right?
Yeah, that's true.
But you probably gave up on philosophy because, in fact, the Buddhist philosophy is a lot of hogwash, too. There are certain romantic elements to it. There is and can be only one valid theory of philosophy, and Ayn Rand had the greatest mind in the history of the human race. She thoroughly identified the value, nature, principles, role of philosophy in human life. And she has a lot of people in this world actually quite excited. Imagine that here in the 20th century, the greatest mind in the history of the human race came along and actually for the first time defined what knowledge itself is. She realized at one point in her life that she wanted to integrate as much knowledge into her mind as she possibly could. She was smart enough to realize that as a precondition, she had to know what knowledge itself was. That's really getting serious about thinking.
Yeah, it's
Take the time and identify what the concept of knowledge itself is. How can you know that you have valid knowledge in bodybuilding if you don't know what knowledge is? I hope this is not scaring anybody. It's supposed to be exciting.
it's fascinating, and I'll say it again. It is absolutely gripping because, it's just something you don't hear from too many people. Not too many people have a real passion for knowledge. And
well, as I said on the first tape too, we live in a militantly anti-rational culture where people are actively discouraged from thinking.
It's true.
Why? Because many of our schools for the last 30 or 40 years have been using the teaching methods of John Dewey, the progressive education method. John Dewey was militantly anti-cognitive, anti-conceptual. He believed that teaching children to think was literally an unnatural burden. He believed that children should be brought to school to give free expression to their natural impulses, which is a bunch of garbage. Why should you let children who are already wild be left unrestrained and give vent to their so-called natural impulses? Beyond that, he said the purpose of education was to teach children to conform to society. And as Ayn Rand pointed out, what does that mean? To cruelty, injustice, murder, mockery, snobs, pretentiousness. That's what we see about us today in society. And even back then when John Dewey was advocating his theory, I came to find out recently, quite interestingly, that the man who funded the progressive education movement in this country, the man who gave a tremendous impetus to John Dewey's educational movement, was David Rockefeller, whose purpose is to start a one-world government. Now remember, John Dewey's philosophy is militantly anti-cognitive, anti-conceptual. He literally didn't want to teach children to think. He wanted to stultify their minds, hamper, cripple them as much as he possibly fucking could, so that possibly David Rockefeller could take over the world. Remember, Hitler wasn't the first one to use this, but Hitler raised it to an art form. Hitler literally hired writers to print and distribute pamphlets and books undermining the populace's confidence in reason, making them dependents, like children, be led by a strong paternalistic government. That's what a dictatorship is, people. This stuff is starting to scare me a little bit because I see it's so darn clear. I suspect Arthur Jones did too. He told me a while back that when he was in his 30s and 40s, he started enlightening himself and started to see what was going on in this world politically. We are literally, this whole world is going in the direction of statist tyranny. How is it to be achieved? Through philosophy, by undermining people's confidence in the power of their own minds. Don't think for yourself. Be led by a strong paternalistic government.
Right.
So that, of course, philosophy, as important as it is in helping an individual decide on what kind of a bodybuilding routine to perform, it has social implications.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Most people, how are you going to know what's going on in the world if you don't know what's going on in the bodybuilding world? And most bodybuilders don't know a damn thing about bodybuilding. This scares me a little bit. Most bodybuilders passionately value this thing, Bill. You know that. They're so darn fanatic, it's almost funny.
Right.
In a sense, it's actually kind of endearing because they're so romantic about it. They so much value their lives. They want to achieve goals.
Right.
but they don't know how to think about it. If they haven't learned how to think about bodybuilding itself, do you think they've taken the time to look out into the world around them and learn to identify what's going on out there either?
Yeah. No.
This is what happened to the people in pre-World War II Germany. That's how they got led into fascism and Nazism. They couldn't identify what was going on before it was too late. You see this?
Oh, yeah. No, I see what you're talking about.
When people don't know how to think, when they don't take the time to sit down, look out into the world and identify and evaluate what's going on, which is something you can't do, by the way, if you don't have a sufficiently developed conceptual faculty. You have to have the concepts, the ideas, the words necessary to identify and evaluate the fact. Then what happens?
Mm-hmm.
You're opening up the path to any dictator who wants to come in and tell you what to do.
Yep.
And that's what's happening. We are progressively losing our freedoms, without a doubt. Now they're going after the supplement industry.
Right.
I'm not a fan of nutritional supplements, but I would fight to defend their right to sell that stuff.
Right.
I think people should be informed about which ones to take and not to take if they need them at all.
Mm-hmm.
But the government has no right to legislate our lives. Who is the government anyway? Their track record ain't so great. They ain't the greatest makers in the world.
Right.
If you find this boring, dear listener, then you have my best wishes again, because we're talking about life here as well.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. But
And all of this, even if you forget about it 10 minutes from now, it'll come up in your mind again. Learning to look out and understand life in general makes achieving your bodybuilding goals a lot more exciting too. If all you do is achieve bodybuilding goals or come to understand bodybuilding, then you're in kind of a vacuum. There's a big world out there and you can't ignore it. You will continually feel the pressure of that world on you if you don't take the time to sit down, learn how to think about it, identify it, and evaluate it. There will always be that pressure. You will know that you're failing somewhere in your life. You'll feel an odd sense of guilt.
mm-hmm.
This stuff is fun. Learn to look out in the world. By learning how to identify what you see, it becomes much less frightening. Remember when you were a kid, Bill, you screamed when there was lightning
Oh, yeah.
and thunder? Now, what caused you not to be afraid of it? You gained the knowledge that it was a natural phenomenon. It wasn't something mysterious or magical or mystical that you should be frightened of. As soon as your parents or your teachers told you what it was, as soon as you gained a scientific understanding of that aspect of the universe, it failed to frighten you.
Right.
This is why knowledge is so important.
But you mentioned Arthur Jones. Was he into philosophy, or just was he just a thinker by nature?
No. Arthur Jones told my brother a long time ago, and I'll quote him here exactly. He said when he was in his 30s, he was tremendously emotionally fucked up.
Mm-hmm.
Something happened in his life in his late 30s, early 40s. I have every reason to believe that he literally discovered Ayn Rand and or Aristotle. I have no doubt it had to be that.
Mm-hmm.
He understood that there was something going on inside him that he couldn't understand, he didn't like. He said he was emotional. I don't like to use the term fucked up too often, but he did say that. He said, I was emotionally fucked up. He sought to understand the reasons for it. He wanted to learn how to think about what was going on inside of him. And this is the inner state of most people today. A lot of you who are listening are becoming quite intensely interested now because you're identifying with some of this stuff. I've had my problems too. The only way you can come to understand your problems, your emotions, your thinking, is to learn how to think. This requires a certain type of discipline which only philosophy can teach you.